order to know whether you're making money or not, you will have to find out whether you're pricing your meat or your products correctly. In order to do pricing, you would need to start with the basics and you need to do what's called a block test or a yield test. Unfortunately, it's not as simple as buying and selling. You've got that option, you can, and we are going through a couple of those options. But if you want to buy a carcass and you want to break it down into primal cuts and you want to sell specific things, then you will have to unfortunately go through the process of conducting what's called block tests or yield tests. Now, in this case, I've gone and taken a B grade hindquarter and I broke it down into primals. You can see the start weight was 79 kilograms. It was cut, and all the weights of the cuts were recorded. It added up to 79 kilograms, and I just worked out the percentages per cut, what that cut makes up of the whole carcass. So you can see there that the loin, for example, is quite big, the top side was quite big, and the bones, they made up quite a bit of the weight. So purely based on what is listed over here, I can tell exactly what happened during the process. So, and it's over time, it's something that you just learn uh, as you get experience in terms of processing and breaking carcasses. So if you look at, for example, the trimmings will always be there. That's as a result of the process. Your silver side, your top side, from the loin, it says it's not deboned. But if you go further down, we've got the fillet or the fillet, and therefore I know that this is a club steak. If it was deboned, then we would call this a sirloin, and the bones would obviously, the weight will go up. The rump and the tail is over there, so I know that I can use the rump for steak if I wanted to, and if I wanted to make, let's say, espetada, then I can use the rump tail for that. It's very popular, but it is there for other uses as well. If you don't have anything that you can use the tail for, you can put it with the trimmings, but you want to try and do as much with the tail as possible because it's generally a more expensive cut, and you wouldn't use it for something cheaper, such as trimmings. Thick flank, you've got the fillet or the fillet, you've got the bones, and then what I did is I split the body fat and the kidney fat. Now, the body fat is the fat around the muscle, and the kidney fat in this case would be the fat around the organs. So the kidney fat is not great. So you wouldn't want to use it for something like dry wars, because this is the kind of fat that sticks to your palate. Whereas body fat melts a lot easier and it's a lot smoother. In this case, you can also see I've got the short rib as a whole, as well as the soft shin. If the short rib and the soft shin was deboned, which you can do, there's nothing wrong with it. If it was deboned, all that will happen is the weight of the trimmings will go up, and the weight of the bones will also go up. So it's actually pretty simple. One thing that you do need to keep in mind, though, this is very much a theoretical based exercise, and I have not factored in a cutting loss. A cutting loss on average could be roughly 2 to 3%. It all depends on who's cutting. It can go higher. It can go lower, but it's very rare that happens. But in general, you need to make provision for a cutting loss. Anything that falls on the floor, in every little bit, let's say a little bit of fat of the kidney fat in the process as you break the carcass, it's a very hard fat, and it tends to be very brittle. So when you as you pull it out of the carcass, some of this, it might break into pieces and it'll end up on the floor. That's not something that you want to use. You want to keep it one side, so that loss will be factored in as part of your cutting loss. Okay, so I've done the same with a C grade hindquarter, broken down into primals. You can see the same process over here. In this case, there was a kidney, and there was no kidney in the B grade. You can see the strip loin. So the strip loin in this case, if you have a look here, this would be the sirloin. So in this case, it wasn't left with the bone on, and the fillet or the fillet was also pulled out. Generally, a much lighter carcass compared to the previous weight. So you can see there's quite a difference. But you can also see the bones is quite high percentage-wise. So in this one, it's 18.4%, and in the previous one, it was 17.72%. But the biggest difference is that the loin was deboned, and you can see, if we have a look here, at 11 kilos, it's 13.9, almost 14% of the carcass. It drops to only about 7.5% of the carcass weight if you debone it. So there you can pick up the differences. So that's why I'm saying you can, over time, you can tell why weights are different. You can tell what happened with a carcass purely based on what you see on paper or on the computer. So I've done the same exercise with the B grade forequarter for trimmings, also called crops or soft meat. That's generally what you use for mince and any other processed beef. And in this case, I've just taken beef as an example. Right, so I've got the trimmings, I've got the bone, I've got the body fat, I've got the hard fat or the kidney fat in this case. I just called it hard fat because there was no kidney present or no real kidney fat. The bolo was kept whole, so the bolo over here and the thick flank over there are very similar in terms of uses. Kept that whole. If you don't, because also the bolo is generally a little bit more of an expensive cut when you compare it to trimmings. And if you don't use it on its own, 4.8%, 4.08%, sorry, it's 3 kilos. So what will happen is this will decrease and you will sit with 45 kilos of trimming. So it really just increases the weight of your trimmings. The hump in this case also kept at one side. In general, it's great to make biltong. It's got a lot of intramuscular fat and it shows beautiful marbling when you cut it once it's dry. Did the same with the C grade forequarter. So you can go and see, you can go and do your own calculations and see what works. Again, I advise everybody to do this as often as possible, daily if you can, and just have a look at what your cutting losses are. Have a look at what the percentages are and in terms of weights, because you can build up stats and build up general trends around all of this information. And you can very quickly see if meat is going missing throughout the whole process. Okay, so next up, we are going to go through the averages. We'll go through the index. We'll do a bit of forecasting, and then we'll discuss value-added products. Next up, we are going to look at the averages. I'll make a separate video on how the grading works, and the grading works with the fat the fat classification as well as the confirmation. So we have a look at, over here we've got a beef A grade forequarter, average weight in and around 65 kilograms. It's pretty accurate, and currently the price is at 54 Rand excluding VAT per kilo. For a hindquarter, 52 Rand 50. In this case, it's February, the beginning of February 2021. The weather has been very strange for this time of the year in Johannesburg. It's cold, it's rainy, it's windy, and that could potentially be why there's a difference between the price in forequarter and hindquarter. Generally, this time of the year, forequarter prices will be slightly lower than hindquarter due to the demand for people who cook outdoors in the summer months. Winter is when everybody tends to stay indoors and make stews and curries and the like. But obviously, the cold plays a big role at this stage. If you have a look at the difference between the price in sides and the price in hindquarters and then forequarters, it all depends on what you want to do. If your customers prefer, let's say, forequarter cuts, like chuck and brisket and short rib and so on, if you sell more of that, it makes sense to buy forequarters. If you sell a lot of steaks, biltong, that type of you have that type of clientele, it makes sense to buy hindquarters. If you have a mix between both, then it makes sense to buy the sides. All in all, you need to decide what's going to work for you. But in some cases, you might even find that you buy your primals from a wholesaler to make biltong, and you just buy forequarters depending on where you are. It all depends. This is something that you're going to have to figure out. You need to understand the environment that you work in, the area that you are in, and that'll determine what people will buy. Over here you can see the price between a buttock and a rump and loin. So these two combined will make up a hindquarter. So the buttock is essentially the top part or the top half of a hindquarter, and the rump and loin is the bottom half. All the prices are there. You can see pork, lamb, and mutton. All of these average weights are fairly accurate. It helps to know more or less what they weigh if you want to work out your cash flow. A lot of places don't offer any account facilities, so you need to pay it in cash. And if it's actual hard cash that you need to pay with, then obviously you need to get an idea of what it's going to cost. In some cases, the suppliers will only invoice you right at the end, so you want to try and get an idea more or less what it will cost. So if you want to do a quick calculation, you can say at 65 rand, 65 kilos multiplied by 54 rand. This calculation is not right. So it'll cost you 3,510 rand if you take one forequarter. Multiply that by the number that you take, and you'll find that it's a fairly accurate indication of how much it's going to cost you. You can see also that your meat bill can get quite high. So it's for the best to do the block tests and to make sure that you buy only what you really need. You are dealing with something that can spoil, so it does become a bit of an issue if you buy too much. Obviously, you don't want to take money out of your cash flow. If you want to, for example, buy C-grade primal cuts, over here you can see the top side, silver side, thick flank, the rump, and the strip loin. There will generally be 5 primals per box. It's very rare that you can buy only top sides or only silver sides, only thick flanks, only rump, or only strip loin. You need to go to the larger organizations. They offer the individual cuts, but the smaller wholesalers will generally sell you as a set. If you buy 1 kilo to 99 kilos, it'll cost you 92 rand 95, excluding VAT. So it's quite a jump. If you look at the price of a hindquarter at this stage at 52 rand 50, but you also need to keep in mind that if you buy at this price, you don't get any fat, you don't get any bones. You can essentially use probably about 96-97% of what you've been sent can be used, and that 96-97% depends on what you do with it. If you trim it, if you make it neat, whatever you want to do with it, that can determine your essential cutting loss on the primal side. If you look at crops, boneless crops or trimmings or soft meat, you can see that if you put these two together, these crops or trimmings will come from these carcasses. So you get, in this case, you get the trimmings or the crops or the soft meat at 66 Rand excluding VAT per kilo. And sometimes I'll make a separate video on this. Sometimes you need to be very cautious when you buy crops or trimmings, because it can happen that you can end up losing quite a bit. If there's any sinews or anything that you don't want in your crops, you need to separate that, so you lose the labor time for somebody to actually go through and check it. So you lose that, and you end up losing what you can't use in your products. If you've ever had complaints about your mince because there's pieces of bone in it, or there's hard pieces in it and it's not necessarily bone, and you can't figure out why, go back and check whether you've been buying crops or trimmings from other suppliers or whether it's your own. And like I said, I'll make a separate video on this and explain to you why I say be careful. Right, so that's essentially all the averages and the costs. These costs over here are generally quite regulated. If you buy from the abattoir, abattoirs might be a little bit cheaper, but it all depends on how close the abattoir is to you, and it all depends on whether you can go and fetch, whether they can deliver for you. They generally only deliver higher volumes. So if you are slightly out of the way and you don't take enough to justify the delivery, then you will have to buy from a wholesaler. Wholesalers tend to be a little bit more expensive, but obviously they will work with the smaller people, the smaller businesses. And you can, for example, buy beef primals where some of the abattoirs don't. They literally only sell the carcasses. Next up, we're going to look at the meat pricing index. This index was developed many years ago by the South African Red Meat Board in an attempt to try and almost standardize the pricing within South Africa. Unfortunately, retail prices aren't, if you have a look here, the retail prices are not regulated as what wholesale prices are. So it depends on your clientele, it depends on the area where you live, it depends on the weather, it depends on the income of people. There are so many different variables that determine what they buy, where they buy, and how much they're willing to pay, that you can't standardize anything really, not from a retail perspective. So if we then, for example, have a look at rump, the original index is 1.8 or 1,8. If I look at A grade at 52 Rand a kilo for carcass weight, if you go back, right over there is the price. At 52 Rand a kilo, if you look at my calculation, 1.8 or 1,8 multiplied by the purchase price, that gives me the retail price or suggested retail price before VAT based on the index. But if you go and have a look, if I were to include VAT, for example, it's 107 Rand and 64 cents. Now, that's actually quite cheap for a lot of people, especially if you live in Joburg. But if you have a look at the modified index price, that, for example, before VAT is 147. So let's ignore the VAT or the VAT included price completely. We say 147 Rand and 68 cents before VAT. Yeah, it seems a bit high. So we can then start playing around and say, right, 93 Rand 60 is way too little. And also, you have a look at what your competitors are doing. And at the same time, if you use this as a tool to determine whether you're making money, you can also use it as a tool to try and figure out if somebody else is making money. So if your competitor, for example, is selling rump at 93 Rand and 60 cents a kilo, you know that it's very cheap. But the question is, how sustainable is it? And when we get to the forecasting component of it, you can then start plugging in all the different numbers and see whether it's feasible or sustainable or not. But I can tell you that at 1.8, you might sell a lot of it, but you're not going to make a lot of money. In fact, your GP or gross profit margin is so low that it's almost not worth it. So it is advisable to have a look at what your competitors are doing, and also try not to go into a price war. All you want to do is you want to make sure that you make money. Whether they make money or not isn't really your business. You just want to be able to compete. So if you want to, for example, run a special on Rump, you can do that because you know there's margin in it. But at the same time, if you have a look lower down, we've got fat and bones, for example, and that you need to sell at 16 Rand and 59 cents before VAT. So add 10%. So you're looking at probably 18 to 19 Rand a kilo for bones. And unfortunately, it's not necessarily going to sell because the bones, to get the rump, you're going to end up buying, or you have to buy a hindquarter. If you buy a hindquarter, you're going to sit with bones that are fairly lean, and people don't want lean bones. In South Africa, it is a reality that people buy bones, especially the bones with a bit of meat on it, because they use it for stews. They use it as a base for meals. So if there's nothing on it, people aren't going to buy it. So it's great. You might be making a little bit of money there, but at the same time, you could potentially start losing money over there because now you need to drop this price to 10 Rand a kilo to almost give it away. And if you drop the bones price by 10 Rand, in theory, you need to put the rump price up by 10 Rand to sort of balance it out. That's very theoretical, and unfortunately for you, you're going to have to run your own numbers to make sure that it makes sense to you. Okay, so let's take a look at the T-bone, for example. This is exactly the same. So I've gone and taken the rump. I've used the modified index, and I came up to 147 Rand and 68 cents. And if I look at T-bone at 106 Rand and 60 cents, it is fairly accurate for Joburg prices. Although I do think the rump is a little bit expensive, but it also, again, it depends on where you buy. If you buy it in Sandton, then you could probably pay this price very, very easily, if not a little bit more. The fillet or the fillet, for example, there's a big difference between this price and the price that you pay at a retailer. At 168 or 160 Rand and 68 cents, you could potentially pay close to 300 Rand a kilo for it, 286 probably, to be fairly accurate. So there's a big difference. But again, if you live in a small town where people don't have a lot of disposable income, at that price, you might be able to get rid of it. Alternatively, you might even have to drop this price for fillet and pick up some of your other prices to be able to balance it out. And that's why fillet is so popular at restaurants, because the restaurants, they're willing to buy it, and because they're willing to buy it, they can take the volumes, and also they can negotiate much better. So they then get better rates. So you can go and play around with this document. You can go and see what it does. There's all sorts, there's just about everything that you need. Over here, when we look at chicken, I generally prefer to just buy chicken outright and from a wholesaler and sell it. It's simple enough. You take the fillets in this case, or the fillets, and you add a markup onto it. I worked on, let's say, 30%, put a 30% markup or margin, and your selling price is 52 Rand and 60 cents. So, and at this price, let's say you've got a wholesaler that delivers and you've got very little input costs, it's 12 Rand and 14 cents a kilo is a fair price. If you're going to repack it, you're going to label it, you're going to make it look fancy, then this price is obviously going to go up to maybe 55 or even 59 Rand a kilo. Please just keep in mind that we always look at this from a VAT excluding perspective. So this does not include VAT. VAT still needs to come on later. Okay. Then we've got the lamb. Lamb is the same setup. There's an index. There's an original index. I went and modified the index a little bit to try and play around with prices. You can get a primal cut price with the original index. You've got call it the selling price with the modified index, and you will find that at 184 Rand and 80 cents, excluding VAT, it might be a little bit expensive, so you might have to drop this to, let's say, 1,9, and that will give you in the region of about 175 Rand a kilo, including VAT, which is on par. Lamb, unfortunately, is very, very expensive. So the same process applies, and then if you have a look here, lamb, because it's so expensive, if you don't have a market for it, but you've only got a market for certain things, then go out, and my advice is go out and buy whatever you need. So if you need the loins, go buy the loins. If you need the ribs, go buy the ribs. Because you can buy it in a box and you outright just put a markup on it and you can sell it. It makes your calculation becomes a lot simpler. Your stock taking becomes a lot simpler, and you don't sit with stuff that you can't get rid of. At 88 Rand a kilo, while I'm fixing this, at 88 Rand a kilo, you can't afford to give the bones away. There's a 30 Rand, on average, about a 30 Rand a kilo difference between lamb and beef. At 30 Rand a kilo difference, you can't throw the bones away. So if you don't have a big market for it, rather just go buy it out and be done. If you look at pork is the same story. So as with the beef block tests, you take the carcass, you break it down into primal cuts, you weigh it, you make sure that you know exactly what your percentages are, and then you know when you start adding prices onto it. The nice thing is with pork, it's the same process as with lamb. You can go and buy what you need outright. So here's an example of, let's say, a pork neck. So DDD would be deboned, de-rind, and de-fat. So 20 kilos, it costs 66 or 60 Rand and 60 cents from supplier A. You can put, if you put a 30% markup on it, you can sell it at 78 Rand and 78 cents. And there's a competing supplier that sells it at 58 Rand and 99 cents. You put a markup on and also 30%, and you end up on 76 Rand and 69 cents. So it all depends on what you want to do. If you, for example, if you make bacon and you make streaky bacon and you don't have a market for the rest of the carcass, then don't buy the whole carcass. Just go out and buy the pork bellies, make the streaky bacon, and it is what it is. So there we go. You play around with the index. Use the original index as a guideline to determine whether you at least can get to break even. If you can get to break even, it's great, but then you haven't made money. So then you can only pay your supplier. When you start looking at adding your percentages in terms of gross profit, now you start adding a little bit of money to it. You can pay your supplier and have money left over, but you still have expenses. You still have the packaging expenses. You still have things like salaries. You still have other expenses, water and lights and utilities and so on that you need to cover. So it depends on what you want to do, but use the index as a guideline. Go and modify the index to fit your specific needs, and make sure that you make money as you go through the process. this is where things start getting interesting. And this is where you start working out things like your actual gross profit. And you start seeing the numbers. Please understand that these numbers are purely theoretical, and this is in a perfect world. So you've got the percentages over here, and you can see once again no provision was made for cutting loss. I've got all my primals. There I've got the weights, and again these weights come from actual block tests that were conducted. So you want to try and do this as often as you can, and this is a really simple tool. What you just need to do is you just need to keep track of where the formulas are, so that you put in your weights over here. It works out the percentages over there. As long as you can figure it out, then you're good to go. So what I've gone and done is I worked out for, let's use Silverside as an example. I've used Silverside. I said 46 Rand and 99 cents a kilo. I should probably change that. We know that this is equal to 52. We worked on 52 Rand. So over there. So what I did is look at my calculation. I take my purchase price and I multiply it by 0.27 over there. So what I've gone and done is I copied and pasted the index in here. So don't make changes over here. Make your changes when it on the pricing side. So if you want to determine your selling price, do it over here. Make your changes there, because these two index rows will pull through over here. So it'll automatically calculate everything for you. So all you need to do is just do the changes on the pricing index as opposed to the forecasting. Forecasting is only used to make sure that you have the cash flow, to give you an idea of what sort of revenue you can expect. But by now you should know what you should sell your products for. So if I use the original index, 94 Rand and 12 cents, and based on the weight, if you look at my calculation, I took the weight of the cut, multiplied by my price, my suggested selling price X VAT on the original index. So I could get 729 Rand and 43 cents for this cut. Okay, so my total revenue then, these you'll see there's a lot of duplicate here, because I want to be able to work out what is the gross profit in terms of cash flow that I require versus the revenue that I can expect on a monthly basis, for example. So if I may make this slightly bigger, you can see there and over there. Right. So these are the same. You'll see there's a lot of duplicates. Now I've gone and taken the modified index over here. You'll see it's easiest to highlight the. So from 1,81 to 2,13, and you will see there that my price has gone up from 94 Rand and 12 cents to 100 Rand and 9 cents. So you can see also that I've got a difference here. 775 Rand as opposed to 729, and all of this you can just go and play with. I do know that there could potentially be a problem because my GP there seems very high. It's generally not as high, but it could also be that something was inflated way too much. Let's have a look here. So we need to now go and try and figure out where the issue is. Right, so I've got a kidney there, so it won't be there. My revenue Although it is quite possible if I go check 4,700. Okay, so I suppose it is possible if you go and play with the numbers. Again, this is a very theoretical exercise. You need to plug in your own numbers and make it live and real for you. So you can see, for example, if I used over here just the normal original index, I've got all my revenues, I went and worked it out, all the formulas are there, go and add it up, comes up to 4,184 Rand and 12 cents. My gross profit in Rand value would then be 986 Rand and 12 cents. And this would be per my revenue per hind quarter, my gross profit per hind quarter. And I work it out by taking my revenue and I just deduct my purchase price or the amount that I paid for it. And if you go work it out, that gives you a GP of 31%. And 31% GP is not bad. I wouldn't go for less than that. Anything less than that, you're not going to make money. Anything more than that, it obviously depends on your income area where you are, depends on the city where you are, there's a number of variables, but you wouldn't want to go less than 30%. The supermarkets, for example, they will chase a specific GP. They don't necessarily worry about the selling price. So in our case, as small business owners, small butchery owners, at 94 Rand and 12 cents, I could very easily get rid of a silver side if I sell it as biltong meat, or I can make biltong or do with it whatever. But then maybe at 100 Rand a kilo, it starts getting too expensive to try and resell it to somebody else to go and make biltong. But if I sell it as a roast, as a supermarket, people don't generally buy for the price per kilo. It's generally a case of I've got 100 Rand in my pocket and I want to spend 100 Rand. It's not a case of I'm not going to spend 100 Rand a kilo on it. Okay, so if you go and work it out, if you do 5 hindquarters per day for 22 days in a month, and again, this is in a perfect world, it's just to try and do some form of forecasting and see what's going to happen. You could potentially turn over 460,000 Rand in a month. Your gross profit is 100,000 Rand, and your cash flow that you require is 351,780 Rand. So if you have a look at it, revenue 460,000, wow, that is a lot of money. But then you look at your gross profit and you see, but you only make 108,000 Rand of that. If you employ staff, if you pay your staff, for example, 10,000 Rand a month, then and you've got 10 staff members, then you virtually just paid your staff. You've got 8,473 Rand and 51 cents left over. Then you haven't paid for anything else. You haven't paid for your rent, you haven't paid any of your utilities, you haven't paid for packaging, you've paid nothing. It's just this. You've literally paid your supplier and potentially your staff. So it shows you that yes, I'm making money, but at the same time, I don't know if it's worth it. I've gone next to it and I've gone and played with the index, and that's why I'm saying you need to go through the process yourself. I've gone and played with the index and I can see there, right, in this case, I'm running a 48% GP. Still need to go and check whether this is 100% okay. And I could potentially make 167,818 Rand and 50 cents. And now things are starting to look much better. Now I can pay my staff, I can pay my supplier, and I can almost pay myself a salary. And potentially even my rent. So it shows you that you need to go and play with the numbers, and meat, unfortunately, is a volumes game. So in this case, for example, next example, I've got a 4-quarter, same story. It shows you 4-quarter, in this case, 20% GP, very, very low. I have turned over, let's say I do 2 a day for 22 days in a month. I only make 17,000 Rand, but I haven't even paid the electricity. 4/4 generally you cut with a bandsaw. I haven't even paid my electricity bill. I've essentially paid my person who works on the machine, and I paid my electricity bill. So here I haven't made any money really. So yeah, is it worth it? It doesn't look like it. Here I've got a margin of 26%. I make 23,000. It's looking a little bit better, but it's not great. So it shows me that if I do this, then it's great. If I do 4/4 as well, but for me to make money, I need to move volumes over here. So in other words, I need to do more hindquarters. More hindquarters, I need to potentially build up a strong client base for Biltong. There's pretty decent margins in Biltong. Okay, so the same then goes for 4/4 if you want as a C grade, and this is essentially one of those documents where you plug in your numbers, your own numbers, and you start making it real for you. So you do forecasting, run the numbers, go through the reality, and then go back and see where the changes need to be made. Did you have a cutting loss there which you didn't account for? Did you have bones, for example, which is quite a high percentage? Did you have bones that you couldn't get rid of? In this case, I also just need to add that here I've only got 4 kilos of bone. So I'm not sitting with something that I potentially can't sell. I've got 4 kilograms of fat. Also, same story. It's not too much, per 4/4. So I could potentially manage to get rid of that. But over here, I'm sitting with 21% or 13 kilograms per hindquarter. I'm going to have to start making a plan. So all of this, even over here, assuming that I get rid of every single thing, I could make 48%. If I, over here, at 31%, if I don't sell the bones, let's say that's 0, 0, and then you can see, I haven't been able to sell the fat and the bones, and my GP has already dropped by 2%, and now I'm below 30%. So it's not ideal. Let's just reverse that. Fillet, for example. We know that we can get a little bit more money for fillet. So if I make fillet, let's say 250 Rand a kilo because I'm in Sandton, you see my GP jumps up to 36%. And now things start looking a little bit differently. So it all depends. It's one of those, you have to go through the process for yourself. Again, make sure that you don't make changes to the index over here, because it's over here, it's already been linked to the index over here. So make your changes, see what you think you need to charge for something, so that you can, when you do your forecasting, you can come and plug it in, because you've already got your generic or your original index. You've already made the change over here, and then when you go back and you say, right, over here, okay, I need to increase whatever this is, let's say the top side. I need to increase that price because otherwise my forecasting isn't going to work out. And that's essentially how you would do the forecasting component. How do you price value-added products? Biltong is a very good example because it's very popular in South Africa. So what I've gone and done is I've said, for the meat component, I'll take from my forecasting document, I'll take the price per cut per index, and I'll use the normal index in this case. Keep in mind there's weights there. So I'll use the prices for all the different primal cuts, the same that I would use over here, the same thing that a wholesaler will give me. I went and added it all up, divided it by 5 because that's the number of primal cuts that I had. I want to get the average, and that gives me 93 Rand and 81 cents. The modified index, same deal. It comes from over here. Please, again, keep in mind, don't change the index over here. If you want to make changes to the index, make it over here so that it pulls through to the rest of the document. Otherwise, you're going to battle to try and figure out what somebody else did. So then you'll see in this case, because the modified index wasn't changed, that these two prices are the same, but my wholesale cost is slightly cheaper at 92 Rand and 95 cents. When I said keep in mind the weights, I looked at all of these weights here for the primal cuts and I added them up over there, and I've got 26.56 kilograms. So in effect, I went and bought a hind quarter and I'm going to turn it into biltong. So my cost then would be the total weight, or total weight for the meat multiplied by my cost, and you can see there 2,491 Rand 54 cents. So my wholesale cost slightly cheaper because my purchase price per kilo is cheaper. My spices, I worked on spices at 80 Rand a kilo. So I work out, let's say I need to use 50 grams per kilogram of spice. I would need 1,328 kilograms of spice. Work it out, the weight of the spices compared to the purchase price. Check over there. And it'll cost me 106 Rand and 24 cents. And the same cost gets pulled throughout, because it's essentially the same quantity. The vinegar, I worked on, let's say, 25 grams per kilogram. This is not a recipe. Don't follow it. It's just to try and give you an idea of how to do the costing. If you want to try it, you're more than welcome, but please don't quote me on it as a recipe. You need to go and plug in your own details. Right, so what I then have is I've got a total weight, because I've got spices and liquids that were added. I've got 28.55 kilograms. So you'll see then that if you take that, bring the same weight down, if you sell wet biltong. So somebody walks in and says, I want biltong, but I want to dry it myself. You must spice it for me. And you think, how do I price this? You essentially price it in this manner. So you'll see there that your index cost is cheaper than your cost over there. And the reason for that is because you started with 26.56 kilograms, but you added weight to it. And that's why, because you add weight, your price comes down ever so slightly. So the same change over there. And then when you dry biltong, you lose weight. Obviously, the nature of it means that you are losing moisture. Losing moisture means that it obviously gets lighter. So if you work on a 50% loss, over there you can see I worked in a 50% loss. My loss is 14.28 kilograms. And essentially, if you have a look there, my loss is 91 Rand and 22 cents. And the same gets pulled through because I'm losing half of what I had is completely gone. So if I then want to go and work out my selling price for wet biltong, so I'm going to now deal with wet and dry biltong completely separately. So for wet biltong, my cost, you can see over there, is 91 Rand and 22 cents. I just bring it down. The modified cost will also, everything will pull through. Same with the wholesale cost. So my markup then is, if I put a 30% markup on it, my selling price is 118 Rand and 58 cents a kilo, excluding VAT. Same with the modified index. Again, when you change it, it will make the changes. My wholesale cost, you can see it's a little bit cheaper. Total revenue is 3,385 Rand and 75 cents. And I get that because I use my selling price as a base there. My GP So I make 781 Rand and 33 cents if I sell the whole batch. So that is an increase. You can see the difference between my cost and my revenue, and that'll work it out over there. And you can see I've got a 23% GP. What does that tell you? It tells you that my price is too cheap. So if I use the index cost, it's not going to be worth my while to make biltong. I haven't paid. This is making biltong is depending on the weather, depending on infrastructure. It's anything between 2 and 5 days of process. There's a lot of time and energy that goes into it, and at 781 Rand, it's just not worth it. So it shows you that I need to go and change my selling price. So you need to go and change it to make it work for you. But this will give you a pretty good indication of whether you're making money or not. So that's why I use the original index. That's why I use the modified index. And that's why I've also put in the wholesale cost. So you can go and work out what's going to work best for you. Dry biltong works out to essentially the same, because all I did is my costs went up. Everything essentially stayed exactly the same. The only difference is because I lost 50%, I added 100%, and that's why the calculation is essentially exactly the same throughout. So again, you need to go and change your selling price. If you then, for example, make a wors or sausage, if you're going to dry it, I followed exactly the same process as with the biltong. Only difference is I added casings in. Casings are generally quite expensive. So that was the only thing that was added. And the difference is instead of using the meat I had, I followed a specific recipe. Let's say it was 30 kilograms and I needed 1 kilogram of spice. So those were the only big differences. And you can see there, selling it wet, 19% GP. Yeah, it's not great. So what we need to do is we need to up the selling price. And the same with the dry price, selling at dry at 149 Rand a kilo, it's dirt cheap. Let's say I make it 250 Rand a kilo. You can see I'm running a 54% GP, which is very, very healthy. And I'm making 2,100 Rand on a batch of 30 kilos as opposed to 548. If you go back to the biltong, just to do a simple calculation, 237, it's still a good price. It's actually quite cheap. So let's say 250 Rand, it's 27%, 964. So my biltong actually needs to be a little bit more expensive. In this case, for the effort that you go through to make money, it's almost worth your while to just work it out with the modified index and then go and buy your meat from a wholesaler. Add that, so use this because this is going to be cheaper. So use this cheap price, use that expensive price, and you'll see your margin will climb significantly. And that's ultimately how you do the pricing.